We don't have big budgets. What we do have is this ability to move fast, right? So if you think of eyes, lips first, the origin of that really is that we want to be the first one. We want to make the headlines. The headlines really help us sort of get into spaces that people are just not even thinking about yet, or they're reluctant or hesitant to go there.
Welcome to This is Digital, a podcast brought to you by West Monroe. Join us as we talk to leading experts about bringing the digital mindset to your organization.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to This is Digital, a podcast about leading with digital to win in the marketplace. I'm your host, Rissa Redden, Chief Marketing Officer at West Monroe. West Monroe is a digital services firm. We are thinkers and makers who bring hands-on experience and technical know-how to get things done and to deliver lasting value. On This is Digital, we talk to experts about how to go about not just doing digital, but being digital. Today, I am honored to be joined by Ekta Chopra, Chief Digital Officer at one of the most beloved brands, e.l.f. Beauty. Ekta joins us to share more on how e.l.f. Beauty has embraced digital from the very start, to connect with customers, and to create an intersection between physical and digital experiences in the beauty industry. Welcome, Ekta.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak with you, Rissa.
It's my pleasure. It is my pleasure. Ekta, on LinkedIn, you describe yourself as someone who transforms PE-backed companies with cutting-edge technologies, high-performing teams, and digital technologies. I would love to hear more about the path that you are on and how it led you to Chief Digital Officer at e.l.f. Beauty.
Sure. There is, journeys are never linear, and my journey certainly was never linear. It's filled with curiosity, a grounding in empathy that comes from my mom, and a passion for what I do. Like, I wake up every single morning feeling excited about the work that I do. And that is so, so, so important to me. So my origin has always, learning has been a big part of this. I am someone who just doesn't want to do the textbook learning, but actually hands-on, really get a sense of how can I impact the work that I do for no matter what business I work for. A PE firm was one of the areas where I worked, where I actually got to do that at a lot of different domains. And I saw that ultimately technology can enable so much in a business, but it all starts with having a vision, having this, building an organization that can pivot as quickly as it needs to with the landscape that constantly changes. And that's what digital is. It's about change. But then having that empathetic lens to bring together a team that's going to take that vision to execution in ways that you could not imagine. And then the impact it has on your business, So those things are so, so important to me. And my journey certainly has been filled with so many of those examples.
You mentioned your mom as a great source of inspiration around empathy. And I would be curious, is there a story that you love to tell about your mom?
Yeah. Oh my God. There's so many stories. My mom is my best friend. And, people say that, I really mean it. And everything I am because of my mom. And her values are the ones that have instilled the sense that how important empathy is. When you put yourself in other people's shoes, you can see their life, their impact. You can see what's sort of holding them back to do certain things, or how you can play a role in their life as well. So I've seen that my mom, since the beginning, she has been the most giving person that I know. The most giving person. She would have, if she had $1 and somebody asked for the full dollar, she would give it to them. So that's how I've seen growing up, just being with my mother. And she always shared one story that was very close to my heart. It was that, there was a little boy who always cried, and he was from a middle class family, and he always cried for not having shoes, better shoes than his friends at school. And his mom one day took him to a church or a temple and basically showed him so many kids that actually had no feet. And the point of all that story was to say that we always cry for things that we want. We want this better. We want this, and we want the next level. I want a better house, a better car. And we're never grateful for what we have. So those are where like the teaching moments my mom always provided to me, that you have to be so grateful and empathetic in your life. And that's the only way you can actually do good for yourself and for the society. Otherwise, you're always chasing something else. And those are the things that I always keep in mind. And I actually pass them down to my daughter, who's the love of my life. So.
Amazing. Thank you. And Ekta, I would love to hear more about what you do as Chief Digital Officer at e.l.f. Beauty. I'm sure that there is no typical day, but could you paint a bit of a picture for us as to what you do or what you've set out to do in your role?
Yeah, I would say it's exactly the same thing. I have to put myself in my consumers, sort of shoes, right? I have to make sure that I understand the consumer journey. I understand what the pain points are. What are the broken touch points that the consumer has? And you can only do that if you live and breathe their journey. From the time they see us in an ad to the time that they click on something or walk into a store, and how they engage with all those digital touch points are so, so important. So that's like one of the aspects of my job. And I do think at e.l.f., my role is a little bit unique. I also have to take care of what I call the plumbing. And that's, your infrastructure, your security, your data privacy, and other aspects of technology management or technology, sort of infrastructure. So keeping an eye on the consumer need, but then keeping an eye on ensuring that you have the right tool set, the platform, and also the security so that the consumer can feel good about how they're trusting us with their data as well. So keeping a lens on both of those aspects really allows me to create something that is exceptional for the consumer, but it is also scalable and something that we can support in the back end to provide those experiences. Treading both has helped me really be more empathetic with my consumer as well as my internal employees as well, and how they operate to deliver that consumer experience. So I live in both worlds and I love it because I'm a plumber one day and I'm a creative genius another day.
It's an amazing combination. And I'm so curious, when you think about the plumbing and you think about the experiences, is one more important than the other? Do you love them equally? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I have to say that the best part of my job is that I get to do both. And that is the most exciting thing, because we can dream up the biggest ideas. We want this experience. We want it to do 10 different things. And I want augmented reality. And I want this and I want that. But then ultimately, if you have all of that, but behind the scenes, you're not doing, what's also a fiduciary responsibility to investors, or if security, so there's no security breaches, or data privacy, and ensuring that the pages on the site load really quickly and the app can be, seamless to use, and it works on all different, kind of versions of the iPhone and Android. Like all of those things are so important. And that comes from having good plumbing. So big ideas, plumbing, but then meeting somewhere in the middle where you're doing sort of all of those gate checks is important. And oftentimes, especially when very large companies, and we saw that during COVID, right? When very large companies had to go from a 0 to 100 on their digital transformation, did it, but they had to do both of those things, or bypass a lot of those things, because they had systems in place that were so old and archaic that did not allow for those capabilities, right? So they had to make years of investments in months. So that's where I feel e.l.f. has been such a great learning and also a journey for us, because we've been doing both. We're working on the foundational plumbing stuff that's so important, but then we're also thinking those big ideas and making them happen. And we can do that because we focus on both.
I'm curious, you touched on this a little bit. How do you think about the ecosystem then, or the different pieces and parts of the world that you inhabit? And we recently published a look at the top tech trends in 2023. And there's this idea in the report of, separating fad from the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And how do you think about that? Because there are a lot of new things coming, but how do you determine what's hype and what's real?
Such a great question. I love that question. And what I'll tell you is, I grew up in refining this over time, and it changes with every new technology or new change that happens in the landscape. That is, there's 60% of the stuff that you do in your portfolio, whether it's digital or technical, that is, bread and butter. You gotta do those things to like really make sure you're running the fastest speed, and you're monitoring and you're building stuff that's constantly evolving on your website and things like that. Then I would say 20% is like that portfolio that actually is focused on making that bread and butter better, right? Or keeping up with the times. And then you have about 20%, which is your innovation portfolio. These are things that I'm always going to invest in, because once I test and I learn, then I need to go deep and invest in it. So I take a very pragmatic approach of, things that just have to be ABCs, right? Have to be done, versus things that we're going to constantly evolve, because, technology is changing, the way we talk to each other is changing, and all of that stuff. And things that I have to constantly learn and invest in new things and build those capabilities. And oftentimes, those are the things we call the eyes, lips, firsts, because those are the things that we actually have aspirations to go do, whether it be collaborations, whether it be new tech, whether it be new innovation, and we want to be the first to do it. So we collaborate with our partners and we tell them, think of the most absurd things that you wanted to do together, and no other player will play with you. I want to play in your sandbox, so that's how we think about them.
Well, and what I heard you say just then, Ekta, was making a distinction between technology and digital. And I feel like sometimes people mush those together.
Yeah.
How do you think about where the line exists between technology and digital?
It's a very blurry line. And that's one of the things that I often talk to about traditional CIOs, because they're so well suited to be a CDO, but where they get stuck is in the plumbing. And they don't try to tread both, right? And the distinction to me is very simple. It is, if you think of governance, you think of performance, you think of, the capability to move fast. What are you going to build in your infrastructure that allows you to move fast? And from a hardware, from a software or a data perspective, that to me is like the IT, core fundamental plumbing that you have to address. And then what is it that's like pushing the boundaries and bringing something new to life that the consumer looks and feels and can engage with, to me is sort of the digital aspect. And that's how I treat the both is, the fundamental that builds capacity for me to move fast and supports those cool innovations that I want to do across the board. That's how I kind of look at them.
e.l.f. Beauty was founded as a digitally native brand. And can you share more of the origin story? I mean, I do think that is such a differentiator for e.l.f. Beauty, but I'd love to hear your perspective on the evolution of the business.
Oh my gosh, I love telling this story. I mean, imagine, right? Like, we are the OG disruptor in 2004 when you could not, e-commerce was a thing, and it was a thing that was like getting popular, but it wasn't highly, adopted by the general consumer. And in that time, we started selling $1 premium cosmetics over the internet. And how does that happen, right? It takes some really visionary people to be able to do that. So 19-year-old startup with a bias for action, and that's been constant over time. And we haven't stopped living that. Agile, but always ready to pivot. That OG disruption mentality allows us to do that. We're big enough, but then we're small enough, right? We can do a lot of big things, but then we're small enough to not get big, fat, and happy too. Because, if you can think of a $6 billion market valuation with only about 350 employees, that's mind blown, right? Tech companies have so many employees doing so many things, and that's why they're never end up being profitable. And it's because we've managed to do both. We've done some really cool things, but we haven't expanded in our SG&A as much as, and so forth. So I do think that that's coming from our origins, right? Like, how do you do cool things but still stay nimble and still stay agile in when doing them?
Well, and Ekta, I'm so fascinated. I mean, the OG disruptor, I love, of course, but how do you keep that? I mean, 19 years is a long time to keep that same sensibility. How have you managed to do that?
It's because we go back to our origins. Every time we try to derail or we try to do something, we always reflect back on who we are and who we are as a company, what our DNA is. That's sort of the fundamental thing that makes e.l.f. so special. Our It is the best place I've ever worked at. Like, I truly believe that, from our leaders who are, totally visionaries, totally transparent, to making sure we have a holistic compensation structure where people actually get rewarded for doing things together. It is one team, one dream. So I totally feel that a lot has to do with how we've been able to take the origin thinking, being agile, pivoting, with the times, and moving at e.l.f. speed, we call it. All of those things have weaved from the beginning till the now, and they are constantly being embedded in the talent that we bring in, how we upskill people, to how do we make sure that we never forget that. And it is going to get tougher and tougher as you get bigger. The challenge gets bigger to do that. But we always, as leaders, that's one of the things that we gauge for, is that how do we keep ourselves in those roots of that startup mentality, which is so important.
Okay, Ekta, I have a question for you related to that origin. And I love this use of e.l.f. speed as you described it. But as a digitally native brand, how does that make you different from competitors?
I would say that, we often talk about that. And I think it goes back to the concept I told you about. We don't have big budgets. What we do have is this ability to move fast, right? So if you think of eyes, lips first, the origin of that really is that, we want to be the first one. We want to make the headlines. The headlines really help us sort of get into spaces that people are just not even thinking about yet, or they're reluctant or hesitant to go there. And a great example of that was TikTok. TikTok is this big thing now, but when it was just getting started, we were the first brand to test and learn. We did a campaign, it gave us some insights, and we were like, there's something there, and our community is there. So why aren't we there? And we invested further. And the next thing you know, we are 5 times TikTok billionaire. And there's a reason for that. We don't dwell, we don't have red tapes. A lot of the bigger brands have such a hierarchical sort of an organizational structure. We don't. Once we see a signal, we move quickly. And a lot of the makers are at the table. So that's what really makes us unique, is that some of the older companies have this red tape, this structure that is years in the making and hard to unravel, because their whole being is structured around that. And for us, that's never been there.
Well, and I'd love to move now into that intersection of physical and digital. And it's something that we talk a lot about on the podcast, but it's something that I find fascinating. I think if you were to go back in time, people would have guessed or perhaps thought that makeup could never be digital
Mm-hmm.
because it's such an experiential thing that you walk into the department store and you are
Yeah.
greeted and you have this interaction in person.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to hear your perspective on how you bring the digital and the physical worlds together.
Yeah, many different ways. In person experience, it can never be truly, truly replicated. That's in my mind, physical is not completely going yet away anytime soon. So you have to be able to augment that with capabilities in your site, in your mobile, app that you might have, with things like virtual try on. That's a great example of how we bridge sort of, hey, how do I look with this lipstick? Or how do I look with this full face of e.l.f., right? So those are some of the features that allow us to provide. And we saw like the usage on our virtual try on when everybody was home during COVID was insane and still continues to be insane. That's really an important bridge, is like those platforms or tools that allow you to bridge that gap. The second component to that is education. A lot of the times, you could be in a physical store, but you might want to look up ingredients further. You might want to look up more information about, the products and so forth. So how do you make it seamless for them to be able to get to that information and it's on their fingertips, right? So I do think that accessibility to that information is really, really important, because even if they purchase in store, they might be informing that purchase through the digital experience. So you want to keep that in mind. Another one that we really focus on is, how do you make sure you offer, in the case of e.l.f., we do have an amazing loyalty program. And why I love this loyalty program is, we don't care where our consumer shops. You can go to Amazon, you could go to Walmart, in store, on store. I don't care, as long as you can join my program through receipt scanning. So I know that you are that consumer who's walking into Walmart or going to exclusively to Amazon. That way, I can build a bridge of engagement and communication and this brand love, this brand equity that in the past was very hard to do, because you only knew about the purchasers, that were shopping with you directly on website, but not that broader set, a massive amount of people that are shopping physically. So I do think it's not one thing, it's multiple things. It's how do you leverage tools and platforms to bridge this physical digital gap, to making sure information and education is accessible via digital in an easy way, and there's some connection back to physical. And I think the third is building services and programs that allow to bridge for those gaps as well. So it's not one thing, I would say it's multiple.
Well, and it sounds like what you're describing is one experience versus a decidedly physical or a decidedly digital experience. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds perfect. And I would say the challenge is a continuous one, right? So if you think of the buzzword of the century is personalization, which I've heard in every single conference that I go to. And then the new buzzword of the century is AI. So how are we going to pair some of those, the fundamentals of personalization? And in the case of e.l.f., it's every eye, lip, and face is different. Every consumer is different. Every need, want, and desire is different. But then leveraging AI to hyper personalize and hyper scale that experience in those different touch points that, is a very blurred physical digital line.
Well, and since you raised generative AI, which is the topic of the year, it seems, are there other applications outside of personalization where you're thinking about how generative AI can improve that customer experience?
Yeah, every single person in the world is, trying to figure that out. But I would say
Yes.
it's in two ways for us. One, it's important that there is a lot of innovation in the past. Since ChatGPT came out, all of a sudden people came out of woodwork with their stealth startups as well. You have about a landscape of 650 tools last time I was looking at, that are deemed as Gen AI capabilities, or things that were not AI are now co-pilots. So it's pretty fascinating. What I would say is that there's the consumer AI products. So these are products, like shade finders in the case of beauty, shade finders, or it could be how we engage with our community, how we generate content, that's very immersive and looks beautiful. And then there is the fundamental enterprise AI. So because my role treads both, I look at both facets because how can I make the job easy for all the creative, the copywriters, the brand managers to be able to produce this unique content that's needed from the pace that they're moving at. Instead of adding more people, how do I leverage or co-pilot with AI? So I do think that there is a balance of the consumer AI products and the enterprise AI products, and you once again have to think through the fundamentals, the plumbing, because you can go ahead and plug in all these tools, but they will not scale if you don't think about the fundamental plumbing. You don't think about security challenges. You don't think about the governance challenges that are going to come through. So I would say it's a pairing of both, and then having multiple products that are use cases that work for you, because you could do 50 things and out of that, none work for you. So you want to make sure that they're solving for the fundamental in your business.
Well, and Ekta, how do you see the consumer generative AI working with enterprise generative AI? That it feels like you would want to be able to aggregate a shade finder, or you'd want to aggregate some
Yeah.
of this information for enterprise purposes. How do you
Yeah.
how do you see that moving? What's that going to look like in the next 3 to 6 months?
I would say that what it's going to look like is, of course, there's the OpenAI, language learning models that are out there. But in many cases, organizations have chosen not to use it because they're scared of, security and other reasons. In some cases, they've started using it, but it's missing like a really important thing, which is who you are as a brand, right? So if you think about your product information, or you think about your brand voice, your brand tone, your brand language, or the different personas you have in your company. So I think in the next 3 to 6 months, those two have to have a way of connecting. That's the only way to make it scalable. Otherwise, it's nothing. Otherwise, it's making minimal impact, not the major impact that it could be making. So in many companies have a lot of data. They have to start with the fundamentals. Is my data all in one place? Is that where I can build those learning models and Gen AI capabilities? Because once again, if your plumbing is not right, everything else will not be good. So in the case of Gen AI, having all your important data sets in one place, with governance and with the right layers that you need to make Gen AI capabilities not just a fad, but something you will actually benefit from and scale with.
And tell us your thinking around the metaverse. Are there some other, digital innovations that you're thinking about, or other digital technologies that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, everybody moved on from metaverse to AI very quickly, but I do think that there is a version of metaverse in, or call it immersive experiences, that are going to come to life in the forms of worlds that we create, regardless of the platform, or what you build on your app, or now Apple's Vision Pro, how you're going to like really sort of build spatial communities or spatial worlds. To, I also think gaming is so well set up, and in my mind, when I think of metaverse, it's also the gaming, and the gaming worlds are there, and how those Gen AI capabilities are also going to come to fruition there as well.
Going back to something that you touched on a little bit earlier, Ekta, around e.l.f. Beauty's culture, mission, core values.
Mm-hmm.
You touched on this about, being the OG disruptor, but are there some other ways in which that culture shows up in your day-to-day life?
Yeah. If I think of our vision, so OG disruptor, so bold disruptor with a kind heart, but then our vision is to create a different kind of beauty company by building brands that disrupt norms, shape culture, and connect communities through positivity, inclusivity, and accessibility. And that statement always gives me chills. Why? Because I see it again and again. If I think about, we don't stand up for purpose is a big part of our DNA. And if we stand for something, we're not doing it because it's trendy and it's cool. It's in our DNA, whether it be standing for any causes or whether it be, supporting our community in their causes, and making sure that even from a through, if you think about sort of the ethics behind serving the different communities, like whether in the shape of content, the models that we use, to the creative that goes live, and in fact, the AI that we use, is that ethical? Building those models that are not discriminatory. It weaves into everything that we do from a creative perspective, the messaging, the causes that we support, and things that we're going to build with technology that actually can have a lot of bias. And how do you make sure that that bias doesn't exist?
And how do you make sure that that bias doesn't exist, Ekta?
Okay, it all starts with community.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing your community is the number one thing. And once again, from when we build campaigns, making sure we have that diversity, within those campaigns, whether it, once again, content, the models that we use, to the messaging that we write. In terms of AI, there's a reason why we're not doing mass adoption, right? You want to make sure, especially when it comes to personalization, you can have AI gone wrong very quickly. You can have people coming from different races, and maybe they're seeing, models from different races, right? Like, so how do you make sure that personalization is tailored to that one-on-one experience, and not something that's going to create discrimination, or a sense that we are not for every eye, lip, and face, right? So having testing those models, making sure that those models are then generating the right set of answers or capabilities that we need to build, that truly map back to our vision, that we want to connect communities through positivity, inclusivity, and accessibility, right? So it is, I want to say, we do this already, and our community is very bold. If we're doing something wrong, they tell us. From my CMO, who reads every single social message, and ensuring that we're not seeing things that are not standing behind our purpose.
Well, and I love the focus on community. And I love this from the e.l.f. Beauty website. We stand with every eye, lip, face, paw, and fin. E.l.f. love means supporting individual expression, empowerment, and human rights. We strive to do the right thing for the people, the planet, our furry and finned friends. And
Yeah, you said it for me.
I love that. No, but I love all that. And I think it's the challenge, right? That with AI, how do you ensure that you're keeping those brand promises?
Yeah, it is going to be a challenge, and it is something that we have to test and learn, and not just, that's why the mass adoption from a brand perspective does need a little bit more moderation. It needs a little bit more testing. It needs more rigor. And so whenever we put something out there, especially for a consumer, whether it be a shade matcher, that needs to be very inclusive. We've been testing with, in the past 3 years, I've changed 3 shade matching tools, because we don't feel that what we're offering is 100%. We're constantly moving our own, where we need to get to, or what the target is, because we want to get better and better and more inclusive, and make sure that we're listening to our community always, always, always. That's very important.
And Ekta, how does your leadership approach tie back to culture?
Oh my God, there are so many different ways, right? Of course, there is, surveys that we do internally, and it's a great pride and joy moment, because every time we've done the employee engagement surveys, we've always ranked above the bench, right? Always ranked above the bench. So having a pulse on employee sentiment, do they like working here, really making sure we have those. We recently hired a head of learning as well, and that was another big step for us, because we realized that as we grow, we have to make sure that we are giving our employees the tools and the learnings and the upskilling opportunities, because we move so fast. in how we leverage different technologies, we also want to make sure that our employees are upskilling as well. Whether they work here or beyond, their journey is continuing to grow as well. And that's been sort of met with so much excitement. Like, I can't even tell you how excited people are, because the programs that we're offering, from a leadership perspective, to a new leader, to having high performance team discussions, which is about an open culture, to taking basic skills on being a project manager or things like that. So we definitely embed learning as a big part, because our employees ask for it. So external of the whole company is centered around community, but internally we're centered around employees as well, making sure we're in tune with what our employees want as well.
And when you think about consumer engagement, what role does social media play for you? You mentioned TikTok. I would
Yeah.
imagine other social media channels are important.
Yeah.
Or would you say TikTok is the number one most important way to engage?
No, it's once again wherever our community is. It starts with the
Mm-hmm.
community. So our community definitely is on TikTok, but we tested with Threads day one. We are on Instagram. We have a huge following, almost 5 million plus. On Instagram, Facebook. Like, we are everywhere, but we are always sort of leaning in more where our community is, right? We're the number one favorite Gen Z brand. And that's because we are where our community is. We were the first one on Be Real. We were the first one to jump on TikTok. We've always been on Instagram. So we are where our community is. And that's how we build our investments around that as well. So social media, influencer, and rather, I would pivot to say the creator economy will continue to play a big role in our growth.
And is there anything else you want to add about the creator community?
The only thing that I would say is that, it is the time of the creator. This is the moment for the creators, especially on TikTok with their new TikTok shop that is empowering every creator to now become a small business owner is incredible. So I would say that, and of course, that's one aspect of it. Another one is gaming. There is a huge opportunity for creators there. And this is a moment where all these immersive experiences, the role of a creator with AI, how that plays a role is going to be really interesting. These are the creators who actually leverage AI to make things better versus, being scared of it, like how that gets adopted by the creators, to how it's going to change sort of some of even the fundamentals around governance and policies and how creators are treated. I think that's going to change as well. So this economy is really coming to a big movement, also a big change, and there will be continuous improvement or continuous change in this landscape with AI coming into play.
And how do you think about influencers and creators? That is there a Venn diagram where you have some that sit in the middle that are both creators and influencers, or how do you think about that universe?
That line is getting very blurred, very, very blurred, because in my mind, the way I define it, and maybe a definition different for other people, the way I define it is influencers are your OG, what they've always been creators, but it's how they leverage that, whether it's live shopping, live engagement, whether it be just, the funny videos that you tend to see, honing in on how they now truly have the power to monetize is the pivot, right? So from just being there and, being sponsored by brands and everything else to like not getting the full share of what they might be getting from a monetary perspective, that pivot, how they will have the full sort of, they would have the roadmap to how things get monetized is the pivot between a influencer and a creator.
And on a related note, Ekta, I'm curious to get your perspective on partnerships and how you think about businesses that you feel you should be? I mean, I would suspect it's going to come back to what you said earlier around it's where your community is,
Yeah.
that's going to inform the partners that you align to. But any other comments on partnership as a channel for you to engage with that community in a different way?
Yeah, well, and I will say it again. Everything starts with the community. And we get the signals from our community, and all the answers that we seek often are in the sort of the conversations that they're having. So whether it was our Chipotle collaboration, that we did, which was, 2 years ago, our that makeup collection generated 4 billion earned media impressions, 4 billion, and we thought that was pretty big, right? And fast forward, then we did Dunkin', which did 5 billion. Then we did American Eagle, and all those sort of who we go partner with came from a signal from our community, and where we saw that the community was like had affinity to those brands essentially. And so every time we do a collaboration, there's a lot of art and a science behind it. It really has to be, what is our community going to lean into, and what they're, who are they fans of, and how do we bring the different things in their universe together.
Ekta, you'd mentioned finding the signal in the community. How do you leverage data and analytics to help you with that, to confirm that a signal is a signal?
You can have a lot of data but no insights, and then no actions. And certainly we were very early on in our journey to understand the power of data, whether it be having a loyalty program that gives us a lot of first party, actual data that is not jaded by or dependent on cookies and so forth. This is, our community trusting us to be part of our loyalty program, and us understanding them better. That's number one. Then making sure that that data is centralized in one place with a golden record that tells us, this person is actually this, and this is sort of their, whether it be their history, transactions, or whether it be their needs, wants, and desires, something that they've answered in a survey, or channels that they have connected us on. We take that very seriously. Then you have to have the smart people, in our case, our head of, consumer insights, and the army of teams that she has to build now to ensure that we're leveraging that data and producing the insights that can be very actionable. And it's not one of those things that just this group does. How do you then make sure that everyone who needs to take action, whether it be the digital marketing teams or whether it be the social teams, actually can get this data in a way that's digestible and actionable? So there's not one thing, but having a full system of things that are going to ensure that your data is not just sitting there and it's in a data room or in a data lake without being actioned against. That is something that we constantly improve and leverage. But for us, I would say really making sure that everything starts with an actionable insights is a question that every leader asks, which is a great start, because then you know that people are leaning into data and they trust the data, which is also important.
Ekta, as we begin to wrap up, I would love to ask you, what can other companies learn from e.l.f. Beauty's digital successes and failures?
The 4 things that are very important from a learning perspective, because this is a constantly changing world that we live in, would be keep your ears open, tune in and listen to your community, what's happening around you, and dream it. Like whatever you want to do, keep your head in the stars, dream of those big things, never let go of that childlike spirit of like, I want to do this thing and paint that blue sky. But then don't forget, and it goes back to the fundamentals and the foundation, having your feet on the ground, which is the do it, right? How are we actually going to do it? And lastly is, how are we going to do it faster than anybody else? So e.l.f. speed. For us, it's the speed of culture. Very important. So I would say those are the key things that I would advise anyone who's leading, whether it be marketing or digital, is keep your ears open and dream the big things, but make sure that you don't focus on the foundation, and do them fast. Don't just keep thinking or dwell on them. Just test and learn, build that capacity. And that goes back to the failures too, because this is a skill that we have honed in on. We weren't perfect. So I would say it's constantly tweaking. All of these things are important as well.
Ekta, what's the best way for people to follow what you're up to and what you're going to do next?
Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. If you want to join us, we're hiring a lot of people. So go to TikTok and you will see, definitely LinkedIn is where you'll see our culture come to life. If you are a consumer, then definitely follow us on any social media. We're there, but TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere you like.
Fantastic. And before I ask our final question, I do want to thank Madison Mize, who recruited you for this episode of This is Digital. She saw you speak at the Gartner Marketing Symposium and was, I think, first in line to begin the recruitment of you for this episode. So I want to thank her. And then I also want to thank my former colleague, Becky Leonard, who introduced me to e.l.f. Beauty many years ago, and I still am a fan. So my thanks to them both.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you.
That's right. So my final question is something that we ask all of our guests. Ekta, what does digital mean to you?
Constant change. It is constant change, and your ability to adapt to that change is, those two things are what digital mean to me. It's like this landscape is constantly shifting and evolving, and you have to be able to reinvent yourself to constantly adapt to it as well.
And you have to reinvent at e.l.f. speed.
That's right. There you go. Now you're speaking my language.
Well, Ekta, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining our episode of This is Digital. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to This is Digital. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget to leave us a review. For more information on This is Digital, visit westmonroe.com/thisisdigital.